Hello, my name is Truc Duong and my project is about CO2 emission. Since I only have like 5 minutes on the free plan of the video recorder, I will have to fast forward some slides. So my project will visualize and compare CO2 emission statistics of the world, Sweden, and the United States. But first, why should we care? We should care because CO2 emission have significant impacts on climate change, human health, and it also creates economic opportunities. About the data, I found the data set from Kaggle, and the data was obtained from the U.S. Energy Administration. The raw data here, we can see that it has data for all countries in the world, and the clean data for the clean data I only extracted data for the world, Sweden, and the United States, and I also changed the time frame from 1981 to 1920 because we can see that in 1980 there was no data for Sweden. So CO2 total CO2 emission by region. Here we can see that the total CO2 emission of the world is the highest and it increased over the years. However, the CO2 emission per capita of the world is actually the lowest. So which means that an average person in the world produce less CO2 than an average person of in the United States or a person in Sweden. So I also created a segmented bar chart to illustrate the CO2 emission of the United States as a fraction of the CO2 emission of the world. We can see that the total CO2 emission of the world increased over the year, while that of the United States stays pretty stable. CO2 emission by energy type, we can see that the world and the US had similar CO2 emission by energy type distribution, and noticeably petroleum is the most popular energy source used by public. So in the regression analysis, my independent variable is US GDP and dependent variable is US CO2 emission. We can see that we have a very high R-square, which is 0.947. So this means that 94.7% of the changes in the US CO2 emission can be explained by the changes in the US GDP, but we can still suspect multicollinearity bias. So I create another regression analysis using the rate of change of US GDP and the rate of change of CO2 emission. So in this regression, we can see that the R square is very low. The T stats is also slow. It's also small, which means that the rate of change of US GDP is not explaining much in the variation of the rate of change of US CO2 emission based on this data set. So in conclusion, my observations is that while CO2 emission of the world as a whole increased, the CO2 emission of the US and Sweden decreased over the time period, and while US and Sweden are both in the top 5 greenest countries in the world, CO2 emission per capita in these two countries are still higher than that of an average person in the world, which means that US can do better. Coal and petroleum were the dominant energy sources in the three regions, and that produce a significant amount of CO2. And also last but not least, a high or low GDP of a country isn't necessarily predictive of the amount of the CO2 emission produced. Thank you for listening.